the background information of what's going on during this time. Then we discussed what the first chapter being more or less an outline of the entire prophecy of Isaiah. Okay, at least that's kind of why the way it's laid out. And then last week we took off of, some chunks like I said we were going to do, because I'll be here this time next year if we decide to go chapter by chapter and verse by verse. And nobody, I can assure you, nobody wants that. But study it on your own, and read through it. This week, we took a big chunk out. We talked about those chapters kind of outlined again early part of his ministry. It also touched on the coming of Messiah too. At that time when we turn, spears, and plowshares, and so forth and so on. And there was a lot of descriptive writing about the comparison of, okay, there's not going to be nations warring nations. And this isn't a prophecy of, the end of all wars, and, we can take a millennialist view and say that, this is referring to Christ coming and setting up a 1,000-year reign or something weird like that. No, that's the focus from Isaiah's future is that there's not going to be this nation trying to defend itself from other nations. Instead, what's going to happen is people are going to work the vineyard. Now, how many times have we heard that from the New Testament? Working the vineyard, the symbolism of crops and harvest and things like that. And what is that harvest to do? What are we harvesting?
Beth wanted to teach. She knows them.
That's good.
They left
Leaders?
right when we came.
Yeah. Bringing people into the kingdom. So, with Isaiah's message, this long before Christ steps foot on earth, shows that, okay, we talked about it in Revelation. I mean, everything concerning the redemption of man and the reconciliation of man has been planned from the moment the fruit of the tree of knowledge was eaten. And probably before that, because God sees that far. But and again, one of the things also that we talked about, and we'll talk a little bit about it as well, but what benefit was it at this particular time? 750 years, 700 years, something like that, before Christ came to for the prophet to explain this is going to happen. What benefit was it for that many generations before to know that the Messiah was coming? Any ideas? did talk a little bit about this last week. Well, I mean, what do we talk about now? We talk about that time that Christ is going to be coming again. All right, that's what we talk about now. I mean, there are those that talk about things like the kingdom that he's going to establish and things like that, but it's the idea of the hope, okay? And there's another thing too. The prophecy this far back to when the events actually happened, that, you know, the people of in the first century and at the time that Jesus walked the earth should have been able to go to a book like Isaiah and see Messiah's here. And it wasn't kept a mystery. It wasn't, oh yeah, by the way, you know, you've heard the term, somebody's playing 4D chess while somebody's playing checkers. Well, God's playing 4D chess when, our brightest of scholars and physicists and all of that are still playing tic-tac-toe. They're not even at checkers level when it comes to God's foresight and plan. Oh, I just gotta throw it, I'm off on a tangent, but, sorry about this. Well, before I get into it, we're going to just talk about chapter 6 today. Just one chapter. We may finish early. The reason being is because another chunk is coming up, and that's chapter 7 through 12. Okay? So, but we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 6 today, where Isaiah talks about his own experience in seeing, not God himself, even though it's kind of explained like that, but God doesn't wear robes or something that drapes over a room, and we'll see that as it goes in there. If you want to be reading, that's fine. But I was thinking about a while back, I was thinking about that Webb telescope that they have out there, right? And I even came across something just the other day where it's like, hey, one of the great marvels of man, this is going to be able to see billions of years into the past. And that just that little statement just kind of verified what I've been thinking, and that is, our scholars and physicists and all that stuff, what they're looking for, right? This is my opinion, but I think it's pretty obvious. They're looking for the Big Bang. And they figure if they can get a telescope big enough to reach out, they can see it, because, it takes so much time for light to travel and all these weird theories that, man has. And you know what they're going to see? They're going to see the same as what they've been seeing. They're going to see the same with the Hubble telescope. They're going to see the same as what we look up in our skies, because it doesn't work like that. So, anyway, all right. So that was a freebie. No extra charge for that. Okay, so chapter 6. Now, again, there's some interesting figurative language here, or symbolic language of Isaiah's vision, and just like any other descriptive visions like this, it is something that our pathetic human brains can wrap around. Okay, So, anyway, we'll just kind of read through. This will be one chapter that we actually go through and read. In the year of King Uzziah's death, now that kind of gives us a timeline of when he's writing this, okay? So, about 750-ish BC. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and excited, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Now, this is again when I'm talking about with figurative language, okay? There's instances in the Bible like this, referring to God, but there's also passages in the Bible where no man has seen God. No man could see God. Jesus says to the woman at the well, Jesus is spirit, therefore we should worship him in spirit and in truth. So, this, like Revelation and Daniel and Ezekiel and all those books that have that very symbolic writing of things, these are, we couldn't handle seeing God, we couldn't describe it. So it's presented to Isaiah this way, because God is a spirit. Is he wearing a robe? A lot of people think so. But, you see the paintings from long ago of, So, anyway, seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among the people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Now some versions will have the King of armies, the King, instead of hosts, but it's the same thing. And again, putting ourselves in that frame of reference at that particular time, the Lord of armies, that denotes significant power. Would it as much this day? Well, we really don't have anybody that even can claim that in the way that this is described. Okay, so now about what Isaiah is about to describe, there's at least 2 thoughts on this. Of course, I don't know how many others there could be, but one is that by him writing or at the time that he wrote this, and he's explaining the vision, that this is, the beginning of his prophecy. The other thing is that, okay, he waited to tell this at a later time to not put the emphasis on himself, but his message, okay? But this is here, so it validates him as a prophet. And what is a prophet? Really, gets right down, not the modern thought, but the real thought of a prophet.
One who speaks for God.
Right. One who speaks for God. One who speaks exactly what God is telling him to say at that particular time. You know? So it's not always future telling. Daniel was a lot of future telling as far as that was concerned. But then again, he was interpreting the dreams that are going to happen in the future. Okay, so it's kind of, I mean, you can kind of take it as, you know, the ones getting the dreams were the ones actually seeing the future. And Daniel was merely interpreting it for them.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, we were talking about how, you know, they talk in figurative language and everything. And, yeah, it's true, no man has ever seen God, the face of God, or, you know, to live. But it was highly interesting that Moses actually literally got to see the back of God.
Oh.
When God put him in the cleft of the rock. He covered him so that he wouldn't see his face, but after he passed by, his glory passed by, then he saw his back, the backside. And of course it doesn't describe what that looked like, but all I know is then after that happened, that the people had to make Moses put a shroud over his face because his face glowed from being in the presence of the glory of God. So it's pretty amazing.
Well, and then God moved through the garden.
Right?
He was moving through the garden when he found Adam hiding.
Yep.
So, yeah, there's that, and again, whatever is revealed either to them that, you know, have these encounters, or as it's written, it's, you know, it's for our benefit to, you know, kind of put our mind around something that's undescribable. So yeah, so prophet, you know, is speaking for God. They're delivering the message that God would have, and as we talked a couple weeks ago, I think, that, you know, these prophets didn't live or didn't die of natural causes. And, you know, same with the apostles. It's because of their message. All right? You know, so people didn't like what they were saying and figured, well, you know, if we off this guy, how about Jesus? You know, they thought maybe if we kill him, then maybe our troubles will go away with the things that he's telling us. And that's kind of, you know, human nature, isn't it? So here's Isaiah seeing this vision, okay? These seraphims, and they have 6 wings, but they're, you know, they got wings that are covering their faces. They have wings that are, now, I didn't get into the symbolism of that, okay? So, I mean, if somebody wants to bring that up, that's fine, but I didn't get into it. I wanted to just kind of concentrate on what's happening here, okay? Isaiah's in the presence of the Lord. We'll just kind of leave it like that, a kind of general statement. And he sees these cherubim, and cherubim, seraphims, so with wings, yeah, these are, possibly separate beings. Like I said, I didn't try and get into the symbolism here.
It looks like John saw a similar thing when he saw his vision that he wrote about in Revelation.
Yeah,
They were the
Yeah.
same type of creatures with 6 wings.
yeah, they
He
have
gave him even more details of what they
heads
look
of
like.
lions and men and stuff like that, yeah. So, holy, 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 Lord of hosts, the whole earth is full of his glory. And again, you know, we got numerology in here, the threes, you know, and 3 is another complete number. And the place was filled with smoke. So, you know, again, there's a lot of symbolism here, which would, you know, we could sit there and talk about, but the idea here is, you know, Isaiah's reaction and what happened to him after that. Okay, so he sees this. So this is Isaiah's, you know, when you read in the Revelation, you got the throne scene, right? And, you know, it's really spectacular. And so this is Isaiah's kind of version or vision of what he saw as a throne scene, okay? Of course, in Revelation, there was a little bit of difference there because things had advanced. There were martyrs, there were, you know, saints and all that that hadn't happened yet. So Isaiah's vision is a little bit more simple, okay? But it's still the glory of God. And this is a message to Isaiah. Okay, let's read on here. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs, and he touched my mouth with it and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven." Now, that's New American Standard. Anybody else have anything other than forgiven?
Atoned for.
Atoned for. I think that is the more accurate translation there, okay? Because nobody's sins were forgiven yet, right? I mean, am I misspoken when I say that? At Isaiah's time, nobody's sins have been forgiven. They've been atoned for. They were atoned in the ceremony every year as directed by God, but anyway. But the idea here is that Isaiah is describing seeing this and figuring that the worst has just come to him. And he's like, how can I be here? Because, and notice he says, I am a man of unclean lips. Okay? And where did the seraphim bring the coal?
To his lips.
To his lips, to his mouth, yeah. So, gonna burn away that iniquity that Isaiah is feeling at this point. Okay? It's like, here, you know, yeah, you do. We're not, it's not a, you know, soothing him and saying, oh no, I mean, everybody makes mistakes, Isaiah. No, put a burning coal on his tongue, on his mouth, where he said, I have unclean lips. So, it doesn't describe how that felt, at least not right here, but Isaiah acknowledges, okay, I'm changed. And,
Yeah, he doesn't seem afraid to speak after that
yeah,
to,
exactly.
to God.
So, he could, at this point, after he had been relieved, we'll just say it, atoned for his unclean lips, he was now worthy of service to the Lord. Then I heard a voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. He said, go and tell this to the people. So, here we go. Isaiah is before the Lord. He says, I'm paraphrasing, of course. I'm unworthy, I'm unclean. Okay, we can take care of that. But this is going to hurt. I don't imagine there's anywhere ever that getting a burning coal on your tongue is going to feel okay. But in this case, it might have, because that was ridding him for atoning for his sins. Now, the Lord says, okay, I need somebody. Who shall I send? And Isaiah's response was, here am I, send me. And we sing a song about that, right?
Of course, I guess something to think about is, and this may be off the wall, but is when he's in the beginning of 6, when he says he saw the Lord sitting upon the throne. So was he like John and not on this plane of existence? You know, or was he trying to be literal? You know, I saw God, I was out one day and I saw God, you know.
Well, I mean,
But we know that can't happen because he'd be dead, you know. So when the idea of the coal on the lips may not have been so much as in a physical state to where he would feel pain, maybe? I don't know. It's just kind of unusual to think about that because, you know, normally when we hear people saying that they saw God, it's, well, it doesn't really say. So we can't really speculate, but it's just, you know, no one can see God and live. So makes me wonder if he was in a different, like I said, different plane of existence.
yeah, I
at
mean,
that point.
John was taken
Right.
to where he was to see all the things.
Right.
And yeah, Isaiah really doesn't get into all of that, and which also makes it kind of interesting because, you know, again, you know, John, when he begins the revelation, it's a progression through the whole book, okay? And it begins with how he received this revelation in the throne scene. But before he does that, we have the letters to the 7 churches. And being an exile in Patmos, you know, John couldn't have known in such detail the things that were going on at each one of those churches that he addressed. So that kind of set up not only to correct, you know, those places, but also to validate him. And I think that's a good part of what's going on here. But Isaiah is not, you know, it's not about him. He's simply saying, I'm doing what God told me to do. All right? He asked who he's going to send after I was worthy, you know, getting my sins, my sinful lips, my unclean lips fixed. And now he says, I need somebody to go and tell the people. And Isaiah says, Here I am.
And back to what I was saying a second ago, and he could have been in, kind of a literal sense, because, when Jesus was born, the shepherds saw the heavenly host, praise, saying, "Do not be afraid, for this night is born a child in Bethlehem," So they actually saw the heavenly angels and whatnot, and they didn't die, so, there's been many accounts where people throughout the Bible saw the heavenly beings and didn't die, so. Yeah, it's just,
One rest.
it's just something that's not known. So, it's interesting.
Okay, so we're gonna go into what he is to tell the people. Okay. He said, go and tell this to the people. All right. Now, keep on listening, but don't perceive. Okay? Just keep on looking, but don't understand. Something like this guy, real desire for, just completely gap me off. I want you to gap me off. Render the hearts of this people insensitive, their ears dull, and their eyes dim. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and return and be healed. Then I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, until the cities are devastated and without inhabitants. Houses are without people, and the land is utterly desolate. The Lord has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. Yet will be a tenth portion in it, and it will be again subject to burning, like terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled, and the holy seed is in its stump. Okay, so that's a pretty harsh message. He's not saying, the Lord didn't tell him to go and say, hey, here's a word of encouragement. It's almost like I don't know, you can answer this, Tori. We ever got sarcastic with our kids? Yeah, go ahead, don't listen to me. That's the right answer. Go ahead. Continue, don't listen to me. I wouldn't want you to listen to me, because then you might get clues to what's going on. Don't keep looking. I want you to understand. Again, does this give the impression that God is real happy at this point?
No.
Absolutely not. Render the hearts of the people insensitive. And all of this is going to happen because of the message that Isaiah is going to preach. They're not going to want to hear it. There's going to be a majority of them that say, they're going to blame the messenger more than, understand the message. And they're going to keep on doing what they're doing, and then there's going to be consequences for it. And we'll see that, as we go along. There was some descriptive, language about such things that are gonna happen to them and such in the earlier part of the book, but this is basically, you know, just kind of dropped right in here because, again, I don't think Isaiah intended to make this about himself, but here is his reference, like a, you know, like on a resume, basically.
Explaining why.
Yeah, explaining why he's the one delivering this message. Because he was told, God asked who to send, he said, here am I, send me. Okay, since you volunteered, here's what you're gonna do. And then you see like, you know, this kind of language and this kind of message is, you know, considered in commentaries and such like that, you know, this is gonna harden their hearts. We know we've heard that many times. So, anyway, any other comments, questions, gripes, moans, complaints? Brad's back, so now there's 2 elders you can complain. Not just Chuck, okay? I think we'll just wrap that up for now, and then next week we'll look at chapter 7 through 12, and then the week after that I need a substitute, just for that Sunday. Brian's here, he can do it. Right?
Not with that, it won't be.
Well, now you have a reason to stay.
No.
Thanks, Jeff.